Hello and welcome. I am Dogbert and I have the plunger on my head. That's right, it's time for another of Dogbert's Team Toilet Paper Infographics. For the Pegasus team today, I didn't have time to make an intro. I barely had time to make this. So this is what we're going with. We're just going to jump right into it. We're going to wipe in with Kestrel first. Of course, Kestrel being a great character, she is possibly the main damage of this team with her constant pings. And, well, it's time to say that she should be a raider when we're talking about this team. Now, outside of this team in plug-and-play situations, that's different. Now, this doesn't mean that you should just immediately go, if you have Striker, especially at ISO Blue 5, you should just go and make her a raider. This is more for people who have not built her and put the ISO Blue 5 maybe, that if this is the most optimal way to run on this team is with her as a raider, although Striker will work as well. Don't worry if you don't have raider. But if you're looking for the absolute 100% most optimal raider for this team, on the team, plug and play, different story, depending on how you're building her with. As for her T4s, her basic is recommended. This is extra damage, extra defense down, but she will work without it, of course. You're going to see this with all her T4s. Her special, again, recommended. Extra damage, of course, but she will do her job without it. She'll continue the ping, continue to put out a lot of high damage. And her ultimate, this is more damage to the primary target, I believe 100% off the top of my head, to make sure you can kill them, because remember, if you kill somebody with the ultimate, they can't revive. So technically she can kill somebody without this, but the extra damage makes it a better chance of killing somebody, and the extra damage is always a good thing. And last but not least, her passive, also recommended. This is extra damage on her pings. So if you only had one T4 to put on Kestrel, the passive would be the first one I would put on there, because her main output of damage is these pings, especially on this team. But all these T4s are just recommended, although I think most people would have all the T4s in her anyway, because she is that good of a character. She was always that good of a character. She just needed that stat boost, which she got with the quote-unquote rework. Moving on to the second character, that is going to be Darkhawk. This is the guy who actually made the 4-piece work, because with him being able to give out ability energy if they use their basics and whatnot. He is also going to be a raider. He has a lot of extra crit in his kit, and he of course hits a lot of characters. With pretty much this whole team is constantly hitting the entire board or close to it. So this is why he's going to be a raider. His basic is just a luxury, though. In reality, if you are getting to the point where you're using your basic on him, something's either gone very wrong, or you're at the end of the node just trying to conserve energy. Therefore, getting the little bit extra bonus there on the basic really doesn't matter with Darkhawk. You know, just a little bit extra damage. And I believe it's an extra offense down for 2 turns to the primary adjacent targets, but that really shouldn't matter at the point you're using a basic on him. As for his special, this one is actually required. This allows him to spread all the negative effects from primary target to adjacent targets as well. And he also applies offense up for 2 turns to self and adjacent tech allies, so that means it works outside of raids, and it works with anybody, doesn't have to be the team. The big thing, though, is the spreading of negative effects. This can be ability blocks and blinds, and in the raid nodes, the enemy characters tend to be all grouped together, so this allows them to spread all those effects. This will not spread stun, though. On top of this, this ability also still puts disrupt and defense down out there as well, but you definitely want to be able to get all those negative effects. You want to make sure you're transferring everything. That's why this is absolutely required. His ultimate is nice to have, if not borderline luxury. This is 25% damage per offense up on the character, and he gets offense up to 2 turns to himself and all Pegasus allies, although you probably don't really need it. You'll probably have it from Rescue or somebody else already. So that's why his ultimate is only a nice to have. I've never even bothered to put that T4 on it. He just really doesn't need it. As for his passive, this is actually a highly recommended one. This is 30% crit damage for him and 15% crit damage for the rest of the team. That's actually quite a bit more damage that the team can be putting out then. And don't forget, with this passive, if somebody has a vulnerable, they lose 30% of their crit chance. The enemy character loses 30% crit chance. This is another reason why you want raiders on these guys. You want to get vulnerables out there. You do not want to be eating up vulnerables with this team when you're using them together in the raid. And now we're on to the third member of the team, and that's the turd of the team! Yes, the turd of the team, the character you don't really want to build but have to make the team work. And in this case, though, this turd's actually pretty well polished. And that turd is Rescue. When we're talking about the full team, she becomes the turd of the team. Although you can drop Ironheart and use a 4-piece with Kang to get through the nodes. Although using the entire team is much easier. As for her ISO, it's going to be Healer. Now, don't forget, on her turn, then, it means she's going to heal whoever the most injured is and put regens on them. So they're going to get the heal from that, but because you're also putting a buff on them, they also get an additional heal from Iron Man Infinity War, because whenever a Pegasus ally gets a buff, he puts a small heal out as well. So keep that in mind. Other than that, she doesn't do a whole lot of damage, but you're going to see one thing about her is her basic is actually required. This is one character you actually will be using the basic on to put out defense downs. In order to put any kind of defense down out, that requires the basic to be T forward. It actually does give her a little bit more damage, but she doesn't really do much damage. The special also required this takes up 250% health stolen to 500%. This makes it a very big heal when you use it, plus she's stealing 5% health off of all targets on the field. Especially as the higher difficulties go with those bigger health bars, you're going to notice this a bit more. Her ultimate required. Otherwise, she doesn't revive anybody. You lose your insurance policy. If somebody should die, she can't res them without this T4. In order to make her work and do her job, she absolutely requires this T4 to work. And finally, her passive also required. This is the one that gives her the extra 50% speed bar and ability energy should one of the Pegasus allies die, to make her go very quick and hopefully revive them with her ultimate. So again, all the T4s on Rescue are actually required to actually make her work the way she's supposed to. Moving on, we come to Iron Man Infinity War. And his ISO is going to be Raider. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Dogbird, but his basic goes and takes 5%, takes speed bar away. Well, here's the truth. The fact is, he's slow, number one. Number two, you're going to be using the special ultimate pretty much the entire time. The only time you use the basic is when you're at the end of a node or something's gone terribly wrong. You're barely going to be using that. So therefore, Striker is a horrible idea. You do not want to remove the vulnerables from the enemy targets because of like the decreased crit, decreased resistance, things like that you get with those vulnerables as long as the character has vulnerable. So, like I just said, his basic is a nice to have. It does make it go from 5 to 10% speed bar reduction, but in reality, you shouldn't really be using this except at the end of a node to save energy. His special is a nice to have. The ability block for 2 turns would be nice. The problem is, if the enemy characters are actually taking 2 turns, that they need 2 turns of ability block, something's probably gone wrong, because you should have them dead before they can even think about getting a second turn in which this ability would actually be used. Now, his ultimate is absolutely required. This is the one that allows him to apply blind to every single character that has a vulnerable when he uses it. This is actually his main job. He goes third. You're going to be setting him up with Kestrel and Ironheart to get vulnerables out there so that when he goes on his ultimate, because he does go third in the turn order, that he's putting blinds out pretty much the entire side of the board, you're hoping, or close to it. And his passive is a recommended passive. This is, let me look it up exactly. I believe it is extra. Let me see. Let me get this exactly right. All right, this is extra damage for the entire team. On top of that, don't forget he also lowers the resistance of people with 30% will have vulnerables. You definitely want the extra damage for the entire team, never mind him. That's why this one's recommended. Technically, he will work without it. Technically, the team could work without that extra damage, but it's a lot easier if you have damage and just kill the characters. And last but not least, we have Ironheart, who is also a Raider. No, you do not want Striker on Ironheart. You absolutely positively 100% want her as a raider. The reason being, like I said, that turn order, Kestrel going first. Now, if you have Striker on her, she's not going to put out any vulnerables, which makes this one really need to have a raider. But if Kestrel had Raider, she'd put some vulnerables on one side of the board. Now, Ironheart, when she goes, the first thing she does is do her ultimate. That hits all enemies on the board. You want to put those vulnerables out there for Iron Man, who's going next, to put the blinds out there. So keep that all in mind. That's what you need. That's why you need her as a raider. As for her basic, this is just a luxury. This is not a great basic. This is just 60% to the primary target. It does prolong the duration of all negative effects, except for the ones that matter, ability block and stun. So keep that in mind. It's not a great T4. Her special is required because this gives 2 turns of trauma out there, which is always nice to have, and 30% extra damage. You can almost say that this one should be down in the recommended, but I like having extra trauma out there, especially when we start talking about that boss node with stupid Hulkbuster and just 5 Lavelles out there to clear it. That's incredibly annoying. Her ultimate, this one is absolutely required. This is a great ultimate. This is 50% damage to all enemies, and like I said about her ultimate, it's hitting the entire board anyway, so you want that extra damage. She stuns the primary target for 2 turns, so like on the first node, you'll only be targeting Gambit, probably, to stun him. But if you bring the rest of the team with her, she gets to stun an additional random enemy. Extra control is always really nice. This makes her a lot easier. Technically, this one could probably go down to a recommended as well, but those extra stuns and extra control and that big extra damage, it may not seem very big, but it is. That's a lot of extra damage when it coming from Ironheart. And last but not least, we actually have the passive, which is required. The 15% armor for self and all Pegasus allies is nice, but that's not the big thing on this T4. That's the big thing is when an enemy drops below 50%, they get disrupted. This is incredibly important actually in the raid nodes of those shield securities on node 2, and most importantly, that annoying freaking Hulkbuster on the boss node. My god, why can't we have a tanky ass Hulkbuster like this in our lineup? Nope, it has to be only in the raid. We get one that's just paper thin. So that pretty much wraps up the Pegasus team. Let me know what you think down in the comments so that I can ignore you. And until next time, everybody, remember, wipe your ass with Marvel Strike Force infographics and save toilet paper everywhere. Goodbye, everybody.